What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here with Awesemo.com. We are back again this week to analyze the three keys to this week's MMA DFS slate. We are talking UFC Vegas 7, Muhnoz taking on Frankie Edgar. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you know when this video and all others go live on the Awesemo channel. We have a highly anticipated bout on our hands. Pedro Muhnoz taking on Frankie Edgar. Pedro Muhnoz is returning to the octagon after a year layoff. He lost his most recent bout to Aljamain Sterling. Frankie Edgar, he is a loser of two straight. Now he will be dropping down to bantamweight to take on Muhnoz. And there's a lot to talk about on this slate. So for the three keys, we're going to talk about a couple fights that you should target for DFS, high upside fights, fights that have a lot of knockout potential, things that'll score well in your lineup. We'll talk some chalky fighters. What chalk should you eat? What should you maybe avoid? And then lastly, we'll talk some leverage. This is extremely important on this week's slate. We already have three replacement fighters, and you'll need to monitor as the week goes on. Weigh-ins are tomorrow. We are recording this Thursday afternoon, and we've already seen three late replacements. But we're going to start up-tempo fights with knockout potential, ones you want to target, and we need to start with the main event. Muhnoz taking on Frankie Edgar. On DraftKings, Muhnoz is $9K, $21 on FanDuel, 1.8 times on SuperDraft. On the other side, Frankie Edgar is 7.2K on DraftKings, 18 on FanDuel, and 2.35 times on SuperDraft. This is going to be a fight we want to target either way. It's 5 rounds. Of course, we see that elevating scoring potential, but both of these guys are also very aggressive. Muhnoz in particular is very aggressive striking. He lands the fourth most significant strikes on this card at 5.29 per minute. Plenty of upside here. In his most recent decisions, we saw him score 105 and 117 strikes. That was against Aljamain Sterling and Brett Johns. Edgar historically has pretty good striking defense at 68%, but we now have seen him lose the striking battle in each of his last 2 fights. He is 1-3 as far as record goes in his last 4, all of which have occurred since 2018 onward, and we have seen Edgar knocked out twice in that span. Of course, if you're looking at the underdog here, Frankie Edgar has a strong wrestling background, and we know that scores well on DraftKings. For what this is worth, Muhnoz, he holds 81% takedown defense, hasn't allowed a takedown in 6 straight fights. But if you are just trying to take the DraftKings upside route with takedowns, Frankie Edgar certainly possesses that. He does need to be a little bit wary here. Muhnoz does have an awesome guillotine choke. He's finished 6 opponents with this choke in his career. But what I'm trying to say here overall, this fight's going to score well. If it goes to decision, we're seeing 2 aggressive fighters. If it finishes early, we know that scores well across the platforms too. The fight is plus 140 to go the distance. Muhnoz in particular is minus 125 in the distance. I'm expecting him to come with high ownership, but we're looking at a nice fight to target for DFS. Our second fight, Takashi Sato taking on Daniel Rodriguez. So Sato, $7,500 on DraftKings, $16 on FanDuel, 2.25 times on SuperDraft. On the other side, Rodriguez is $8,500, 18 on FanDuel, 1.9 times on SuperDraft. This fight features 2 very aggressive power punchers with a lot of knockout potential. We only have 5 UFC fights between these 2 guys, but Rodriguez is landing 8.6 significant strikes per minute, which is absurd. Sato is landing 3.94 himself, which is a fairly good mark. If we look at strikes absorbed, we're seeing a ton of action between these 2 guys. Sato has a negative striking ratio, absorbing 5.1 strikes per minute. Rodriguez absorbing 6.81, a really high number in and of itself. We actually just saw Rodriguez in an absolute war earlier in the pandemic, taking on late replacement Gabe Green. He lands 175 strikes, but allows 127 to Gabe Green himself. Both fighters bring massive knockout potential. Rodriguez has finished 10 of 12 fights in his career, 6 coming via knockout. Sato on the other side, 13 of 16 fights finishing early, 11 coming via knockout. This fight is plus 120 to go the distance. Sato is plus 300 for an early finish. Rodriguez is plus 155. Another fight I think you should have your eye on this week. And the last fight with a lot of upside here, it might not be one you're expecting, and we're getting a little bit off the board with Mizuki Inoue taking on Amanda Lemos. Inoue, 8.6 on DraftKings, $16 on FanDuel, 1.95 on SuperDraft. Lemos on the run back, $7,600 on DraftKings, 15 on FanDuel, 2.2 times on SuperDraft. Again, probably not the fight you were expecting. It's not a fight that has a lot of finish potential. It is minus 190 to go the distance, but this fight does have action written all over it. Both fighters are landing north of 6 strikes per minute. Both of them have significant negative striking ratio, so they're two women that will take a lot of damage in their fights. And if this fight hits the mat too, I think we see a lot of upside from grappling. Lemos in particular averages the second most takedowns on this card at 2.59 per match. In a way, in her debut, she went 0-4 on takedowns, but she holds 9 wins via submission. She comes in with a strong wrestling background. I think she could get the job done on the mat as well. Now, this fight, while a finish isn't exactly the most likely outcome, these two fighters bring enough aggression to the table where they should score well in a decision, which is why I think it's low-key a pretty decent fight to target just from an aggression standpoint on this card. But getting to our next topic, and this is a really important one with all the late replacement fighters, we need to talk about how to navigate chalk. There's a lot of fighters that are expensive with lopsided betting lines that we need to navigate. So first and foremost, we know people will be heavily exposed to the title fight. The main event, not the title fight. Muhnoz versus Edgar. And I think a majority of these people are going to come down on the Muhnoz side. It makes a lot of sense just with the overall line, and he's minus 125 in the distance. But we haven't discussed Maria Agapova, and we absolutely need to. Right now, she is sitting at a minus 1250 favorite. She is minus 365 to finish this fight in the distance. Those are absolutely incredible lines. They're reminiscent of Khamzat Chimaev level lines, but she is only 9.3K on DraftKings. She is an incredibly good value on FanDuel, just $19, and she is 1.5 times on SuperDraft. I'm expecting her to push to be the most owned fighter on this card, and deservedly so. With a price of just 9.3, she's not really restricting what you need to do with the rest of your lineup. So I do think this is probably some good chalk. And in your low-risk contests, your cash games, just taking a stand on Agapova, putting her in your lineup is going to make a lot of sense here over Shayna Dobson. It's just a strong play all the way across the board. From there, we're looking at a couple other fighters that could carry some high ownership. Timur Valiev, Mike Rodriguez. Now Ike Villanueva is facing a replacement, and as is Dwight Grant. So a lot of players that you can put in your lineup with late replacements. Looking at Mike Rodriguez, minus 235 over Marcin Prachnio. He is minus 150 in the distance. That is the second best in the distance line on this card at this point in the week. Rodriguez, I think, likely carries higher ownership on DraftKings, where he is just $8,700. A little more expensive on FanDuel at $19 and 1.8 times on SuperDraft. I think we're looking at a DK play here, high ownership guy there. Ike Villanueva is someone we need to talk about, and this is a line I think will probably move throughout the week. Originally slated to face Jorge Gonzalez, my favorite bet on the week, but we no longer have that. That was originally the 8,000, 8,200 matchup with Villanueva at 8,200. He now faces late replacement Jordan Wright. Now, Jordan Wright, $7,900 on DraftKings. He actually opened as the favorite when this was released, these betting lines, and we've seen them flip. Now, that was an egregious line to start, and it's immediately been bet down. Jordan Wright, in his first 6 opponents that he's faced, they had a combined win-loss record of 0-47. His first solid test came on the Contender Series, where he was knocked out in under a minute. That contest was later scored as a no contest because his opponent Hernandez ended up testing positive for marijuana. I'm not sure how Villanueva is not a larger favorite here, but he's at a nice price point, $8,200. If you're trying to jam in some studs, you're trying to get in Agapova, Muhnoz, anyone at the top, he's a nice favorite in this range. I'm expecting the line to continue to move in his favor. He's someone I think could carry some ownership here. And then Dwight Grant, $8,800 on DraftKings. He's similar in price to some other studs up at the top, but now opening minus 400. Not the most aggressive fighter on the card, but still should carry some ownership here. He's $17 on FanDuel, 1.9 times on SuperDraft. The best value, in my opinion, here does come on FanDuel at just that $70. Pretty affordable price to jam him into your lineups. Grant only has 3 UFC level fights, but his opponent, Bourne, only hasn't really faced any competition whatsoever at this point in his career. He's taking this fight on just 2 days' notice, so I do think the line is warranted here. And at $8,800, $17 on FanDuel, 1.9 times on SuperDraft. Dwight Grant should carry some ownership as well. The last one, Timur Valiev. So Timur Valiev just got a late replacement today. Originally slated to face Striegel, now taking on Trevin Jones. He is 9,100 on DraftKings, which is quite expensive. $20 on FanDuel, 1.6 times on SuperDraft. He's right around the second most expensive fighter on all of your platforms. Originally, I thought he would come in with lower ownership, but now that he is facing a replacement on 2 days' notice, I could see his ownership climbing a little bit. Now, the thing is, all these fighters that are priced 8.8K and above, 9K, they can't all be highly owned. You just can't fit them all in your lineup. So it'll be really interesting to see as the week goes on who ends up with the most ownership. Right now, my early take is Agapova. I think she's great chalk in cash games, but there is, of course, a lot of reasons to consider fading her in your GPPs. On FanDuel, Agapova, I expect her to be the most owned pretty easily. Top value on the slate at $19 there. It's not really close. Dwight Grant there, $17 should be highly owned as well. I think Rodriguez and Valiev won't carry as much ownership. But if you're looking to get different navigating this chalk, you always have a couple options. You can leave some salary on the board. In MMA, that is usually strong in your tournaments. We see these lineups duped a lot. We only have 11 fights this week. So, of course, leaving salary on the table. Another option is to play the less owned fighters in these fights, taking on Shana Dobson or Prachniow, Bourne, Wright, anyone we just mentioned as the opponents of these highly owned fighters. That can give you leverage. But then pivoting to our leverage fights overall, just some under-owned fights you might not be considering. Last week we saw Verna Jandiroba, we saw Pineda. They were all in the optimal lineup. We don't know a lot about MMA variants. We just see it week in, week out. Sometimes your fighters bust that are highly owned, your Sean O'Malley's, your Herbert Burns. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. So if you're looking for just straight up leverage spots, Ovin St. Preux, Alonzo Menefield, this is the 7.9, 8.3K fight on DraftKings. Ovin St. Preux is $16 on FanDuel. Menefield, $17. It's the co-main event here, but it doesn't feature the most aggressive fighters. But what we lack in overall volume, we make up for in knockout potential, finish potential here. St. Preux, he fought his most recent fight at heavyweight, lost, now coming back down to light heavyweight. He will be the bigger fighter, 3-inch height advantage, 4-inch reach advantage. But even so, we cannot rest on Menefield's knockout power. This fight is plus 175 to go the distance. Menefield has a 9-1 professional record. He's finished 8 of those via knockout. Only 1 decision on the profile. St. Preux on the other side, 24 wins, and 19 are coming via stoppage, mixture of knockouts and submissions there. It's a close line between these two guys, and it's a fight that is very, very likely to finish. This is similar to the Parker Porter-Chris Daukaus fight, where if we do see a first-round stoppage here, which bookmakers are pointing to as semi-likely, the winner of this fight very likely ends up in the optimal lineup in that situation. So if the ownership is low, which it looks like it will be at this point in the week, taking a stand on one of these fighters could be a big difference in setting yourself apart. The next leverage spot, just for fights, Austin Hubbard taking on Joe Solecki. Hubbard is 7,800 on DraftKings, 15 on FanDuel, 2.2 times on SuperDraft. Solecki, 8,400, 16 on FanDuel, 1.95 times on SuperDraft. There's not really a ton to like here, just looking at this fight overall. Neither fighter is particularly aggressive striking. Solecki will grapple a good amount. He lands 3.99 takedowns on average, and Hubbard only has 50% takedown defense, so maybe that's a path to victory. But outside of that, we're not looking at the most aggressive fight. This fight is not likely to finish. It is minus 280 to go to a decision. I think people are going to play other fighters in this range. Solecki at 8,400, he's close in price to guys like Muhnoz and Rodriguez. It doesn't take a lot of money to go up to get to some of those guys, or you could go down and play a guy like Ike Villanueva. As far as underdog Hubbard goes, he is close in price to guys like Sato. Fighters just in better spots overall. I'm not sure he'll be the most owned either. So if you're looking for a fight, in the off chance it finishes early, or in the off chance it's a lopsided affair and one of these guys does absolutely dominate the fight and score well, it could be another path to getting yourself unique on this weekend slate. The last one, and a fight we haven't talked about, it's 2 newcomers to the UFC, Carlton Minus taking on Matthew Semmelsberger. It's a really interesting fight, kind of a weird price point, just like the Solecki fight. 8,500 for Minus on DraftKings, 7,700 for Semmelsberger on DraftKings. It is not priced on FanDuel yet, Minus is 1.95 times on SuperDraft. Semmelsberger 2.1 times on SuperDraft. Incredibly difficult when we have two fighters making their UFC debut. Not only is it hard to find tape, but neither fighter has really faced a ton of competition at this point in their careers, at least competition that is substantial. Neither fighter appears overly aggressive in this spot. The fight is minus 165 to go to a decision. Not exactly the most likely outcome. An early finish we're talking about there. And we also have a lot of line movement in this fight. So minus opened up as a big favorite, and the line has moved significantly against him, now just minus 125, making him a little too expensive based on what bookmakers are projecting. With other strong lines, other spots with better props, more aggressive fighters, I'm expecting people to lean that direction over taking some unknown fighters in minus in Semmelsberger. And we see this every single week. Last week we saw it with Kamaka. We just have fighters we don't know a lot about. They go in lower owned, and when they score well, they often end up in the optimal lineup. So at least worth noting, these three fights, I wouldn't say if you're playing cash games, are your must-target fights, but they're at least worth considering in GPPs if they finish early or if there's a lopsided fight and one fighter does score very well. But that is the slate. Of course, if you like what you heard here, you can always check out Awesemo.com. We have weekly MMA passes available. We have a ton of free content as well. There is the MMA DFS strategy show, which goes live on Thursday evenings. We also have the live before lock on Saturdays. Also, Awesemo.com recently released a ton of new products, including their fantasy football product, their draft kit. It's August. It's time to start up those leagues, so make sure to check that out. Otherwise, if you have questions, I'm on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Best of luck to everyone out there this weekend, and enjoy the slate.